So we're into the chiropractic assistant training series. So what we're doing is we're covering a lot of the different topics relative to the chiropractic assistant. And so we're going to go on to this topic right now, which is, it's the number one topic of all, which is your phone. So let's go into the phone procedures. Most importantly, not just what needs to happen when you answer the phone, but specifically the questions that patients have. So let's go into that. And what is the importance of the phone? So first, let's go into the importance of the phone. Well, the phone is the lifeline of a business. So it's the absolute you got to think of it as the umbilical cord to your chiropractic business, okay? And the staff needs to see it this way. The staff needs to understand that is the lifeline to the outside world. It has number one priority. When that phone rings, it has number one priority over everything, because that's where the business comes in. That phone isn't answered, not answered right, delayed in the answering, then there goes the business. When we don't have a business, we don't have jobs, we don't have a location, we don't have anything. So everything starts with that phone. So when I was training my staff, I was very clear that they understood that phone was the number one priority when it rang. And I'll just give you an example. I had a client hired me to help them, build their practice. So we're going through a checklist of things to do, and it turns out that they leave the office and do not answer the phone for 2 hours during business hours, during lunch. And they thought it was totally okay to not answer the phone during lunch. Now here they are hiring me to help them grow their business, and the number one thing they do to hurt their business, which is unplug their phone, is what they're doing. And it turns out it was about 20% of the business hours. So they were literally destroying 20% of their business. So the first thing I said to them, I said, answer your phones during the business hours and your business will grow 20%. Now that didn't take a genius to figure out, but you always have your phone answered. Now, outside of business hours aren't relevant. In other words, if you're a consumer and you call the dentist after hours, you don't expect them to answer the phone unless it's an emergency. Well, chiropractors don't get emergencies. Not emergencies like a dentist would get an emergency, or you go to the emergency room, not like that. So the phone call coming in is the most important phone call coming in. And so what he said, I said, how come you're not answering the phone? He said, well, that's lunch hour. He goes, that's when my staff goes to lunch. I said, you let both of your staff members go to lunch at the same time and don't answer your phone? I said, you can't do that. You can't do that. And so, as an example, in our office, we had lunch from 12 to 2 o'clock. That was the lunch hour. And so we would do, let's see, it was 11:30 to 12:30 and 12:30 to 1:30. Those were the 2 lunch hours. So one staff member, and it was up to them, whichever one that they wanted to do, but it was consistent. It wasn't per day. So one staff member would go from 11 to 12. At least I'd have somebody there. That's if you have 2 staff members. At least if you have one staff member would go from 11:30 to 12. Well, I still have a staff member there answering the phone from 11:30 to 12:30. And then the second staff member couldn't go to lunch until the first one came back. So that made sure she got back on time. So the second staff member would go to lunch from 12:30 to 1:30. No problem. Phone was answered. We had somebody there and answering the phone. So that's how you do it. The other options is, and that's the best option, by the way, is as a staff member in your office answering the phone. That's the best option. The other option is, and I'll just share with you when I opened my practice. I had one employee, when I started, I had one employee. So they went to lunch. Now at that time, she had I think an hour and a half lunch. But when she went to lunch, so what I did to make sure the phone was answered, I did one of 2 things. Number one, I would either leave, like she'd go to lunch from 12 to 1. That's when I had one employee. So what I would do is at 11:30, I would run out. I would make the bank deposit. I would grab my lunch, come back to the office. I would eat lunch in the office So the phones would be manned. There would be somebody there answering the phone. Now this is when I very first started my practice. Now the other option is to, when you go to lunch, is to switch it over to an answering service. Now that's better than not having the phone answered, but it's not better than having a staff member there answer the phone during lunch, okay? And again, we're only talking about business hours, you know, whenever you open to whenever you close. Nobody expects you to answer the phone before business hours or after business hours, okay? But you will routinely get new patients during lunch calling in to schedule. And here's the deal, when new patients call in to schedule, they won't call back. In other words, now if it was a trusted source, if it was a referral patient, they'll call back because it was a referral, so it's a higher trusted source. But if they just got you out of Google, like, and for your location, and you got to think for yourself, is this not exactly what you would do? If you Googled a dentist and then you called and nobody answered the phone, what would you do? You'd hang up the phone and then you'd go to the next dentist that's in your area that answers the phone. That's exactly what happens. And so the phone has to be answered. It's a priority. It has to be answered. So the option is, one, the doctor get back to answer the phone. Two, have an answering service temporarily that you just switch it over. But that, you know, that's better than not having the phone answer. And the thing about the answering service too is when you call, you can have the answering service ask a couple simple questions, which is good. And then you have the answering service get the person's phone number. Now that's real important because what you can do with the answering service is they can immediately text you. They can text you the person's name and phone number, so no matter where you're at, you know, let's say your office, nobody's in your office, but you have a phone and a forward service, and say the doctor does whatever he does. Well, they can have the phone forwarded to the doctor to answer the phone. Now, doctors, I will tell you this, when a staff member takes lunch, they're not to be bothered. They're not responsible for answering the phone unless that's part of the initial responsibilities that you came up with when they initially agreed to the employment, or, you know, you give some kind of bonus. But there's no way that, you know, an employee should be having to answer the phone during their lunch hour. It's called their lunch hour. It's not called your lunch hour. So because I've heard doctors do that too. I'm like, well, wait a minute, you can't do that. That's their time. When the employee's on their lunch, that's their time. There's nothing that the doctor has any, you know, right or say or anything over that. And that just gets back to respecting the employees. Unless, again, something was worked out. Something was worked out, okay? But anyway, having said that, but what should happen is if you do a forward answering service, then the answering service should just be sent back to the doctor. And usually within 2 or 3 minutes, the doctor gets a text message of the phone who called in, and then the doctor can immediately call them back. And believe me, it's real good for the doctor to call them back. It's real good. There's way more authority when the doctor calls back as opposed to the receptionist. So those are the options. But one option that's not acceptable is not answering your phone during business hours, period. That's just totally unacceptable because that's the lifeline, okay? So we're trying to put emphasis on things that need emphasized and de-emphasize things that don't need emphasized. We're trying to create structure here. So having said that, we either answer the phone, you either have an answering service that texts you so you can immediately call back. Don't leave it up to leave your staff members alone when they're having lunch. Let them do what they want. But what I suggest, especially if you have 2 or more employees, is just stagger lunch. It's too easy to have one person do lunch from 11:30 to 12:30 and 12:30 to 1:30. It's just too easy. And that's the way it should be done. Okay, so having said that about the phone and putting emphasis on the phone,